Dawn, Tokyo, 1945. This is what would have happened if Project X-ray had been deployed. A B-24 bomber flying at 15,000 feet releases its cargo over the sleeping city. The cargo is not conventional bombs. It is a canister containing over 1,000 hibernating Mexican free-tailed bats, each one wearing a tiny incendiary device attached by surgical clips. The canister opens at 5,000 feet, deploying a parachute that slows its descent. At 1,000 feet, the canister releases its contents. 1,000 bats, suddenly exposed to daylight after hours of hibernation, wake in mid-air and do what bats naturally do at dawn. They seek shelter. They spread across the city in all directions, flying into attics, under roof eaves, into warehouse rafters, and temple ceilings. Each bat carries a tiny napalm incendiary, weighing less than an ounce, fitted with a time delay fuse. At precisely the same moment as Japanese civilians are beginning their morning routines, 1,000 fires ignite simultaneously across a zone several miles wide. The fires are small initially, but they are everywhere, in residential districts, industrial areas, temples, warehouses, places that conventional bombing could never reach with such dispersion. Within hours, the fires merge into an uncontrollable conflagration that consumes the city. This scenario was not science fiction. It was a serious military plan developed at considerable expense and tested extensively. It would have been deployed against Japan if another weapon had not rendered it unnecessary. The atomic bomb canceled the bat bomb, but for 2 years, America's military seriously pursued the idea of using millions of bats as tiny winged arsonists. The idea originated with Lytle Adams, a Pennsylvania dentist who was on vacation at Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico when he witnessed the evening emergence of millions of Mexican free-tailed bats. This was December 1941, shortly after Pearl Harbor. Adams, like many Americans, was consumed with thoughts of how to strike back at Japan. Watching the bats pour from the cavern entrance in a living river that stretched for miles, he had an insight that seemed simultaneously brilliant and insane. Bats are numerous. Bats can carry weight in proportion to their body mass. Bats seek shelter in structures. Japan's cities are built primarily of wood and paper. If you could attach tiny incendiary devices to bats and release them over Japanese cities at dawn, the bats would naturally disperse and roost in thousands of buildings. Time-delayed fuses would ignite the incendiaries after the bats had found shelter. Thousands of simultaneous fires in a city built of flammable materials would create an unstoppable conflagration. Adams was not a scientist or military officer, but he had connections. He was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. He wrote a detailed proposal and sent it directly to the White House in January 1942. The proposal reached President Roosevelt's desk. Roosevelt, instead of dismissing it as the ravings of an eccentric dentist, found the idea intriguing enough to forward it to the National Defense Research Committee with a note saying the idea was worth looking into. The military's interest in Adams' proposal reflected the desperate search for effective weapons against Japan. Conventional strategic bombing required flying thousands of miles to reach Japanese cities, and the B-29 superfortress needed to deliver that bombing campaign was still in development. Any weapon that could cause widespread destruction with minimal resources deserved investigation. The Biological Warfare section of the Chemical Warfare Service was assigned to evaluate Adams' proposal. Their initial assessment was surprisingly positive. Bats were indeed numerous and could be collected in large quantities. They could carry payloads roughly equal to their own body weight. They naturally dispersed over wide areas when released. Japanese urban construction was uniquely vulnerable to incendiary attack. The concept, while unconventional, was technically feasible. In March 1942, Project X-ray was officially authorized. Adams was brought on as a civilian consultant. The Army Air Forces provided funding and facilities. Biologists, chemists, and engineers were assembled to solve the technical challenges of weaponizing bats. The first challenge was selecting the right species. Mexican free-tailed bats were ideal candidates. They weigh approximately 15 grams and can carry payloads of up to 20 grams. They are highly social and roost in enormous colonies, making collection feasible. They are migratory and could potentially be collected by the millions during seasonal concentrations. Their natural behavior, seeking dark enclosed spaces at dawn, aligned perfectly with the weapon concept. Researchers began studying bat behavior in detail, learning about hibernation triggers, flight patterns, roosting preferences, and response to various stimuli. The goal was to understand bats well enough to predict and control their behavior when used as weapons. The incendiary device was the second critical component. It had to weigh less than 20 grams, ignite reliably after a time delay, burn hot enough to ignite wood, and survive being carried by a flying bat without prematurely detonating. The National Defense Research Committee developed a tiny napalm capsule, essentially a miniature version of the incendiaries being dropped from bombers. The device consisted of a thin metal shell filled with napalm gel and fitted with a time delay fuse. The complete assembly weighed 17 grams. Tests showed it could burn at over 1,000 degrees for approximately 8 minutes, more than sufficient to ignite wooden structures. The attachment system required careful engineering. The incendiary had to be secured to the bat without impeding flight, causing injury, or allowing the bat to remove it. Researchers tested various harnesses, adhesives, and clips. The final design used a surgical clip that attached to loose skin on the bat's chest. The clip was similar to those used in medical procedures, strong enough to hold securely but not damaging to the bat's tissue. The incendiary device hung from the clip, positioned so it would not interfere with the bat's wings during flight. Researchers discovered that bats could fly normally while carrying the devices, though their range was reduced and they tired more quickly. For the intended mission, this was acceptable. The bats only needed to fly a few miles from release point to find suitable roosting sites. Collection of bats in sufficient quantity was a major logistical challenge. Mexican free-tailed bats roost in enormous caves across the southwestern United States. Carlsbad Caverns alone hosts millions during migration season. Researchers developed methods to net bats as they emerged from caves at dusk. The collection operations were conducted on a massive scale. Teams of soldiers with fine mesh nets would position themselves at cave entrances and collect bats by the thousands during evening emergence. The captured bats were placed in containers designed to induce hibernation, making them docile and reducing their metabolic needs during transport. The hibernation system was critical to the entire concept. Bats naturally hibernate when exposed to cold temperatures. Researchers discovered that bats could be placed in a hibernation state and kept dormant for extended periods in refrigerated containers. This solved multiple problems. Hibernating bats require no food or water, simplifying logistics. They remain immobile, preventing premature escape or injury during handling. They can be transported long distances without stress. The plan was to collect bats, induce hibernation, transport them refrigerated to bases in the Pacific, load them hibernating into bomb casings, and release them over targets. The bats would wake during descent and naturally seek shelter at dawn. The bomb casing itself was specifically designed for this mission. Each casing would hold over 1,000 hibernating bats packed in compartments with individual incendiaries attached. The casing would be dropped from a bomber at high altitude. A parachute would deploy to slow descent and prevent the bats from being injured by sudden decompression or extreme cold at altitude. At approximately 1,000 feet altitude, the casing would open automatically, releasing the bats over the target area. Timing was critical. Release had to occur at dawn when bats naturally seek shelter. Release too early and bats might fly away from the target area. Release too late and bats would struggle to find roosting sites in daylight. Testing began in earnest in 1943 at various locations, including Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico. Initial tests focused on basic functionality. Could bats survive the hibernation, transport, and release process? Would they disperse naturally when released? Could they carry the incendiary devices effectively? Early results were mixed. Some bats died during hibernation from temperature regulation errors. Others refused to fly when released. The attachment clips sometimes fell off during flight, but gradually, through iteration and refinement, the system improved. By mid-1943, researchers could successfully collect bats, attach incendiaries, induce hibernation, transport them refrigerated, and release them with acceptable survival rates. The dispersal patterns were promising. Released bats would spread over areas several miles wide, seeking any available shelter. In test areas with mock structures representing Japanese construction, bats would roost in attics, under eaves, and in other concealed spaces exactly as predicted. The time delay fuses were calibrated to ignite after approximately 30 minutes, giving bats time to settle into roosting locations before fires started. The most successful test occurred in May 1943 at a mock Japanese village constructed at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. The village was built to exact specifications based on intelligence about Japanese urban construction, wooden buildings with paper screens, thatched roofs, typical room layouts. Researchers released several dozen bats equipped with live incendiaries over the mock village at dawn. The results exceeded expectations. The bats dispersed throughout the village, roosting in various structures. When the incendiaries ignited, fires started simultaneously in multiple buildings. The fires spread rapidly through the wooden construction. Within hours, the entire mock village was destroyed. Damage assessment showed that bat-delivered incendiaries started more fires per unit weight than any conventional incendiary bombing could achieve. The dispersal was far wider than conventional bombing, and the fires started in locations that would be nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Military planners calculated that a single bombing mission releasing bat bombs over Tokyo could start anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 individual fires simultaneously. No fire suppression system could respond to that many fires at once. The result would be a firestorm similar to the firestorms created by conventional bombing, but achieved with far less aircraft and far fewer bombs. The most infamous incident in Project X-Ray occurred during testing at Carlsbad Army Airfield. Some bats escaped from their containment during a test, still wearing armed incendiary devices. The escaped bats did exactly what they were designed to do. They sought shelter in available structures, which happened to be the base's buildings. The incendiaries ignited on schedule. Within an hour, multiple structures at the airfield were burning, including a hangar and the base commander's car. The fires caused substantial damage before being brought under control. The incident was simultaneously a disaster and a proof of concept. It demonstrated that the weapon worked exactly as designed, perhaps too well. The military response was not to cancel the project, but to improve containment procedures and continue development. By late 1943, Project X-Ray had refined its procedures and was preparing for production-scale operations. Plans called for collecting millions of bats and establishing specialized refrigeration facilities to maintain them in hibernation until deployment. Bombing runs would release thousands of bat bombs over multiple Japanese cities simultaneously. Each bat bomb would disperse over 1,000 individual fire starting points across several square miles. The cumulative effect would be devastation on a scale difficult to achieve with conventional weapons. Comparative analysis showed the bat bomb's potential advantages over conventional incendiary bombing. A standard M69 incendiary cluster bomb weighed approximately 70 kilograms and dispersed approximately 100 individual incendiaries over an area several hundred meters wide. A bat bomb weighed approximately 30 kilograms and dispersed over 1,000 bats, with incendiaries over an area several kilometers wide. The bat bomb achieved greater dispersion, wider coverage, and more individual fire starting points per unit weight. Additionally, bats would penetrate into structures that conventional incendiaries could not reach. A conventional incendiary falling on a roof might be extinguished or might burn through the roof before starting a significant fire. A bat carrying an incendiary into an attic would start a fire in an optimal location surrounded by flammable materials with excellent oxygen supply. The fires would start inside structures, making them harder to detect and fight in early stages. By the time fires were noticed, they would already be well established and difficult to suppress. Intelligence assessments of Japanese urban vulnerability supported the bat bomb concept. Japanese cities were built with high-density construction, narrow streets, limited fire suppression infrastructure, and predominantly wooden buildings. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 had demonstrated how quickly fire could spread through Japanese cities. Multiple studies concluded that incendiary weapons were far more effective against Japanese urban targets than high-explosive bombs. The question was how to deliver incendiaries most effectively. Conventional bombing required flying heavy bombers thousands of miles, exposed them to anti-aircraft fire and fighters, and achieved relatively concentrated impact patterns. Bat bombs could potentially be delivered by smaller aircraft, would disperse over wide areas without requiring precision, and would create many more individual fires per sortie. The psychological impact was also considered. The appearance of thousands of fires starting simultaneously from no visible source would create panic and undermine faith in civil defense systems. How could civilians protect against a weapon that seemed to appear from nowhere? Testing continued through 1943 and into early 1944. Researchers refined every aspect of the system, from bat collection through transportation, storage, attachment procedures, release mechanisms, and incendiary performance. Success rates improved steadily. By mid-1944, Project X-Ray was technically ready for deployment. Plans were developed for full-scale operations against Japanese cities. The bat colonies of the southwestern United States would be harvested systematically. Millions of bats would be collected, processed, equipped with incendiaries, and stored in refrigerated facilities at Pacific bases. Bombing missions would be coordinated to strike multiple cities simultaneously, overwhelming Japanese fire suppression capabilities. If you are finding value in understanding the strange weapons that almost went to war, sharing this story helps more than you know. The bat bomb represented one of the most unusual weapons programs of the war, but it was pursued with complete seriousness and substantial resources because the concept was sound and the potential effectiveness was substantial. Project X-Ray was terminated in August 1944, not because it failed, but because it was superseded. The Manhattan Project, developing atomic weapons, was accelerating toward completion. Military planners realized that atomic bombs would achieve the destruction of Japanese cities far more efficiently than any conventional or unconventional weapon. The bat bomb, for all its innovative thinking and technical success, could not compete with a single bomb that could destroy an entire city. The program was quietly canceled. Final costs exceeded $2 million, a substantial sum for a weapon that never saw combat. The bats were released back into the wild. The incendiary devices were destroyed or repurposed. The specialized equipment was dismantled. The bizarre episode of weaponized bats was classified and largely forgotten. Lytle Adams, the dentist whose idea had launched the entire project, expressed disappointment that his invention was never used. He believed to the end of his life that bat bombs would have been more humane than atomic weapons because they would have caused primarily property damage rather than massive immediate casualties. This argument is debatable. The firestorms created by conventional incendiary bombing of Japanese cities killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Bat bombs would have created similar firestorms, perhaps even more effectively. Post-war analysis of Project X-ray concluded that the concept was viable and would likely have been effective if deployed. The technical challenges had been solved. The biological behavior of bats was sufficiently understood and controllable. The incendiary devices worked reliably. The delivery systems functioned as designed. Had the atomic bomb not been developed, bat bombs might well have been used against Japan in late 1945 or early 1946. The Japanese surrender following the atomic bombings made the question moot, but the potential effectiveness of bat bombs remains a fascinating counterfactual. Would they have caused sufficient destruction to force Japanese surrender without atomic weapons? Would the psychological impact of thousands of fires starting simultaneously have been more or less demoralizing than the atomic flash? These questions cannot be answered definitively, but Project X-ray demonstrated that unconventional thinking about weapons could produce viable results. Comparing bat bombs to other unusual World War II weapons programs provides context. The Germans developed explosive rats, dead rats stuffed with plastic explosive intended to be left in coal piles, where they would be shoveled into boilers and cause explosions. The program was discovered and had minimal impact. The British developed explosive coal, fake lumps of coal containing explosives, with similar intent and similar lack of results. The Americans developed pigeon-guided bombs, using pigeons trained to peck at images of targets to guide missiles. This program, codenamed Project Pigeon, was pursued simultaneously with Project X-ray and was similarly canceled despite technical success. The bat bomb was among the most technically successful of these unusual weapons programs. Unlike many exotic weapons that never progressed beyond conceptual stages, bat bombs were extensively tested, proven effective, and prepared for deployment. Only the availability of a more devastating weapon prevented their use. The legacy of Project X-ray is primarily historical curiosity and cautionary tale about the unexpected directions military research can take during wartime. The project demonstrated that virtually any concept, no matter how unusual, will be seriously investigated if it promises military advantage. Dentists with ideas about weaponizing bats will be taken seriously if the strategic situation is desperate enough. Millions of dollars will be spent on research that seems absurd in retrospect. This is not necessarily irrational. War demands exploration of every possible advantage, and seemingly absurd ideas sometimes work. The bat bomb worked. It was simply rendered unnecessary by an even more devastating weapon. In the catalog of World War II secret weapons, Project X-ray stands as one of the strangest and most creative. It combined biological warfare, incendiary weapons, and innovative thinking about dispersal and targeting. It reflected the desperation of early war years when victory was uncertain and any potential weapon deserved investigation. It proved that bats could be turned into tiny, flying arsonists, and that such a weapon would have been devastatingly effective against Japanese cities. The bat bomb never went to war, but for 2 years, America's military seriously planned to burn Japan with millions of flying mammals carrying napalm. The atomic age canceled the bat age, but the episode remains a testament to wartime innovation at its most bizarre and its most serious.